welcome back to Friend Crush. I'm your host, Amber Akilla. This is my podcast where I talk about stuff and things, cute, chaotic, and critical thinking. You can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr at Amber Akilla. And the main page for this podcast is at friend.crush on Instagram. Please feel free to send me your thoughts, feelings, feedback on the podcast. I'm so grateful whenever I receive a message with people either responding to something I've said or telling me that this podcast has been there for you in some way. I cannot believe that me speaking into the void has any impact on anyone's life, but I appreciate it so much. You returning feedback to me has had an impact on me. It's why I continue to record episodes. Otherwise, I would have been done with this long ago. But anyway, hope everyone is doing well. Today's episode is about a saying that I use in my life that's I've been carrying with me for quite a long time. It's keep your expectations low, but your standards high. And I think my understanding of this has changed and evolved a lot as I've gone through life, in different stages. And then I realized the other week that there is a part that I was missing, which is keep your expectations low and your standards high, and don't feel like you have to reward the bare minimum. And this was a part that I had not yet clicked into my mind, and that I realized was kind of like holding me back, to be honest, at least for the phase of life that I now want to enter into, or that I now feel like I'm in. I just don't want to reward the bare minimum anymore. I'm too nice. So let's break this down. I'll explain to you the logic behind it, and you can decide for yourself if there's anything in this that you want to apply to your own life, because it's not just, I think you can use it across the board in terms of your personal, professional relationships, but also, I don't think there's necessarily hard and fast rules for everything. You can be adaptable, and it's just the awareness that you have about the choices that you're making and the responsibility that you take for the consequences of the actions that you take is what is most important, right? There's no reason why you have to do it right every time. It's just responsibility that you take after. Recognizing the part that you play in certain outcomes and then learning from it. That is the journey of life that we're all on together in our own special little way. And I hope that we can all connect and hold space for each other and the contradictions and hypocrisies that we all have within us and slay together. Anyway, so keep your expectations low and your standards high, but don't feel like you need to reward the bare minimum. Keep your expectations low. Part 1. You cannot control other people. So it's natural to sort of project our expectations onto others, especially people that we care about, people that we want in our life, people that we feel like we have a connection to. And I think, in a way, it's easy to assume because, I have the same interests as this person, we must have the same expectations for ourselves when it comes to how we deal with a friendship, a romance, a working relationship, whatever. But it actually just takes time to see who someone is and to show someone who you are as well. And I think more and more I try to find the balance between, putting myself out there, giving somebody else space to be who they are, and then seeing where we are and aren't compatible and the nature of our connection or relationship moving forward in any context. And I think that for me, when I was younger, I grew up as an only child to a single working mother, and I had a lot of responsibilities that other children around me didn't have when I was really young, while still also having a lot of privilege at the same time. But I grew up in a privileged area, so everyone had privilege, but I was not considered a normal kid in the context of the social group that I was around. And I think I sort of feel like I have to go above and beyond all the time to get people, to make sure that other people feel comfortable, or to make sure that everything is going the way that it's supposed to be going, or that things are being handled in the correct way or whatever. And I think I'm just like trying to hold a boundary that's like closer to me and making sure that I'm okay as much as other people are okay. Not other people are okay at the expense of me being okay. So, because not everybody is going to do that, and there's no reason why anybody has to do that. So I subconsciously expect others to do that for me because I would do that for them, but I don't even have to be doing that to begin with. So why should they? So keep your expectations low. You cannot control what other people are going to do. You can try to predict, but even then, like, you don't know. And because everyone is coming from their own context as well, we can only be responsible for how we respond to things that we experience. And even though there might always be an explanation for why people are the way they are, it also doesn't mean that it's an excuse for them to just be shitty. And then on the other hand, it's also not our responsibility to fix other people and to tell them how to live. Like, when I think about different stages of my life where I was like fucking up or I was about to learn a really hard lesson, it didn't matter how many people told me that what I was doing was a bad idea. I just had to go through it myself. I needed it to touch my own skin for me to be like, okay, yeah, that was terrible. Let's move on. What did we learn? Let's figure it out. And that's the same thing that other people have to go through as well. And I think that because now we have this like woke cancel culture, social justice sort of discussion happening, which is great in many aspects, but at the same time it can be damaging because it makes people feel like there's something outside of them that needs to change before they can feel satisfied or capable to move forward. And I think that is like a natural human experience, but more so than ever now. It's like until Y happens, then I can feel happy. Until XYZ happens, then I'll be able to whatever. And yes, it's true that we have so many like structural inequalities, systemic issues in society, but on a day-to-day, like granular level, in terms of the way that you approach life, like more and more I'm able to appreciate that I have a choice in the moment. Once a feeling comes up, once a thought comes up, once an experience comes up, how I'm going to respond to it, how I'm going to let it affect me. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy to choose the quote unquote high road or to choose the path that I feel like is going to best serve me long term, but that choice is still there, right? And I think there's so many things that get in the way of us being able to make the better choice now because we're constantly distracted, because everything is about making money, because our value is like constantly being externalized into things like our appearance or our follower count or the whatever. But when you are able to just become aware of how those things are outside of your own control and just choose to figure out how you're going to approach it, and how that does or doesn't align with the person that you want to be, the life you want to live. It's quite freeing, also very daunting, but I find it freeing for the most part. And it's hard to also return to that place, but I think that really is the only choice that we have if we want to do better. So radical acceptance is an important part of this concept when it comes to keeping low expectations, because eventually we just need to accept people and situations as they are in order to figure out how we're going to handle them. And accepting something doesn't mean that you're deciding that it's okay. It doesn't mean that it's good. It's just like a neutral, like, this is fucked up, or this is amazing, or this is weird, or this is uncomfortable. And then what am I going to do about it? Like, how am I going to manage this? Because if something is really fucked up and you can't accept reality for what it is, your response to it is not necessarily going to get you the best outcome. Like, you need to acknowledge it and accept it before you're able to take action, right? The 4 A's of slaying, or whatever I came up with. Amber Akiller's 4 A's to realizing things. First, you have awareness, then you have, or like acknowledgement, then you have like anger or some kind of emotional response, then you have acceptance, getting to a neutral place, and then action. What are you going to do? So radical acceptance is important because the same with like if something is amazing and I'm not accepting of, the achievement that I have made or whatever, then I might do something crazy, like then I might start like self-sabotaging or whatever. So radical acceptance is important at any given stage of life, but I think it's obviously hardest when things are tough. But once you get to that neutral place, you'll be able to appreciate, like the role that your feelings played in having you reflect on something in a way that, or see something that you previously wouldn't have, and then, the journey that it's going to take you on moving forward. Next part of keeping your expectations low is that people can only meet you at the depth at which they've met themselves. And everyone's capacity is going to be different. It's going to be a different size, it's going to be a different shape, and it's going to be constantly evolving, whether or not like they're active in that process or not, whether or not they're aware of it or not. You are always shifting and changing. And sometimes a part of you wants to really grip and hold on to something that you identify with, the ego part of you, I guess, while, your situation has changed, you have changed, your friends have changed, like people around you have changed, and it will hold you back. So, whether or not you're aware of this process or other people are aware of this process, it's important to have compassion for others, but to also be protective of your own mental space and energy, because I think this concept can also be co-opted into like toxic selfishness in terms of quote unquote protecting your energy and like emotional labor. Like emotional labor is about like marginalized people explaining to the oppressor or people in positions of privilege and power like how they are being oppressed. At least that's my understanding of emotional labor. Like, why can't the oppressor take the time to understand the context in which they are living in, the ways that they benefit, the way that they are affecting others? It's not like explaining to someone you care about the ways in which, you could better communicate with each other. That's not necessarily like, you will have to labor in this life, regardless of whether you have a job or not, because that is just part of being alive. Anyway, so protecting your own mental space and energy isn't about like, okay, my needs come above everybody else's and like I will do whatever I need to do at everyone else's expense to make myself feel good. No, I think that it's more like, okay, my needs or my mental space and energy needs to be protected by me, and I need to prioritize it. I can't expect somebody else to prioritize it if I don't. And I'm going to have to be okay with disappointing people who might expect something from me when I'm not quite ready or comfortable to give it. But I'm also going to have to be aware of times where I will need to invest more mental space and energy into something if I want to have the outcome that I want. It's not like something feels uncomfortable, so I'm out. Something feels good, so I'm all in. Like, not everything that feels good is going to be good for you, and not everything that is good for you is going to feel good in the process of getting it. But I think that when you are able to sort of like be okay with the unknown and the uncertain in terms of understanding someone and yourself, it means that you're not as quick to judge and you're not as quick to try to define something based off a lack of information, So I think it's important to, engage, but then also observe the way that you feel and the way that you're being treated and vice versa. Yeah, there's definitely a balance to strike. And I think it's going to be context dependent. So, for example, if I've been friends with someone for a really long time and the relationship starts to fracture or the connection starts to change, which is natural, if one party is not accepting of the shift and reaches out wanting to discuss it, then I think it's important to show up honestly and have an open conversation. That's one context. On the other hand, if both parties seem comfortable to drift apart and to leave space in the relationship, if there's someone, then it's like no hard feelings, really, and maybe it doesn't need to be addressed and you will just like naturally come together at another time. And then if it's someone who I don't really no, literally like asking me for favors and approaching me in a way that makes me uncomfortable, then it's within my right to draw a line and politely decline, because I don't know this person, and like there's nothing but entitlement in the way that they're approaching me. So the same if I'm asking, and in the same way, like if I'm reaching out to someone with a request, I need to be ready for them to reject or decline my request without feeling like entitled or hard done by. So this is my summary of like, keep your expectations low. You can't control outcomes. You cannot control other people. And it just takes time for you to see what other people are made of, the same way that it's going to take them time to see what you're made of. You know who you are because you're living in your own head, but they aren't living in your head. They can only understand you from your actions, from the congruence between what you say and what you do, and vice versa. So that's part 1. Keep your expectations low. Part 2, keep your standards high. So this is different to expectations. Like, for example, if my friend has said we're going out for dinner to this restaurant that I want to try, and I don't have any context for the restaurant, I don't need to have like, and I've agreed to go. So like my expectations don't need to be super high because I have played no part in this decision other than deciding to go. And maybe the food is like really shitty. That doesn't mean that my standard for the type of food I want to eat has to change, you know? And then in that moment, I can decide if I'm going to lower my standards and eat the food that's maybe not so great, or I'm just going to say, you know what, I'm not that hungry anymore, but I'm here and we're just going to enjoy each other's company. However, if I was going to be like more rigid about this application, I would obviously seek more information about the restaurant beforehand. But for the purposes of illustration, I'm just saying like that's an example. The same way that it's like, okay, I'm going on a date with someone that I don't know that well. Like, you know, like there's always going to be points where you're meeting someone you have no context for, very little context for. Even if I've been told really great things about this person, it's still like reasonable for me to keep my expectations low because I can't control like how this person's going to behave or the type of person that they are. I don't know anything about their history. So I've got to go into the date with low expectations. But as you gather information about a situation, it's important to remember what your standards are. So if I'm not being treated with the respect that I need to feel safe, if I'm not being spoken to in a way that, you know, is comfortable for me or treated in a way that's comfortable for me, then it's within reason for me to just be like, okay, sorry, I don't think this is going to work. My expectations were low, but my standards were kept high. A misapplication would be like, okay, I have low expectations and I have low standards. So my expectations are low for the person that I'm going on a date with, and my standards are low. So I'm just happy to even be on a date. I don't even really care if they don't treat me well. It's like the fact that they even asked me out, that met my low standard, low expectation. But if I had high standards, I'd be like, okay, yeah, you want to ask me out, but you also need to treat me respectfully. You need to embody like XYZ values, or I need to be able to connect with you in the same, you need to be like giving as much as I'm giving to something. And then it's also about like, okay, do you maintain your own standards, or are you just expecting someone else to fulfill them for you? More on that later. But basically, your standards are also for you to decide at any given time in your life, and they are supposed to evolve and change the way that your expectations do as well, according to where you're at. And I think the most important thing to realize is that if you don't decide what your standards are, then somebody else will. And this is something that I've also been spending more time reflecting on because, you know, sometimes, like I just said, you have low expectations and you think that's all you needed to do. Like, okay, I gave you the space to be who you are, and now I'm just going to like let you in regardless. And no, you need to make sure you get to where your standards are and if you're upholding them. And that is really tough sometimes, I think, especially for me, especially like in all contexts, not even just one, because that's why I think time to yourself is so important, because then you can really reflect on what you want and how you're going to approach a situation, rather than feeling under pressure to make some kind of like final declaration without having given a decision the time that it needs to, brew or like come to the surface or untangle itself. In terms of, if I'm not maintaining my own standards and other people will decide them for me, this has a lot to do with just like finding your voice and speaking up for yourself and choosing when it's like, pick your battles, basically. When is it worth me speaking up? When is it like, okay, this is part of the job or the responsibility that I have? So, for example, if I'm dating somebody and maybe I really like them and we get along really well, and I have an idea of my standard for a relationship at this time in my life, and that's going to change, like at some ages you just want to have fun, it's not that deep. Other times you're like, okay, I'm ready to like actually commit to somebody. So if I am in a place where it's like, I just want to have fun and it's not that deep, that's my standard right now. We need to be having fun and I don't want commitment. But the person that I'm dating is like, I'm in love with you and I want us to get married. I'm like, okay, my standards are my standards. We're not compatible. And that's okay. We can figure out a way to like part from this or find a middle ground, or we just have to, let go, live and love and goodbye. But it's obviously hard to have those conversations if you really like someone and you're just in two different places in terms of what you want. It's hard, but I'm just saying, like remember this, because when everything turns to shit, eventually, which is what happens when things aren't truly compatible, you'll know for next time that you needed to assert what you wanted. And again, it's like you're allowed to have your standards, they're allowed to have their standards. It's not about picking one or the other. It's not about you changing your standards to fit them. It's not about their standards changing to fit you. It's just like, look, you want what you want, I want what I want. Both things are valid and they're just not compatible for us to be together or to do whatever it is that we thought we were going to be able to do together, and that's okay. And it's the same thing in a friendship context as well. It's like, okay, for example, you're planning a trip with your friend. Your friend is super bougie, wants to stay at a 5-star hotel. You are more happy to be more budget friendly, stay in like a hostel, stay in an Airbnb, whatever, save money, and you don't want to spend 5-star money on your holiday. You're allowed to have your standard. They're allowed to have their standard. Whether or not you should travel together, that's a different issue. And maybe there is a middle ground that you can meet. They book their own accommodation, you book your own accommodation, then you can like meet in the middle and hang out. Or one of you can make a conscious decision to compromise, and then you have to like make sure that you're okay with the consequences of that. Like, don't be like, okay, yeah, I'm happy to spend more money now to do the 5-star thing and then be bitter about the whole experience. Like, you need to embrace the choice that you make in doing so, because that's why it's like you're allowed to have your standards change, but it's having an awareness and an intention behind the choices that you make once you've changed them for something, so that you can still enjoy your life instead of being like, okay, I feel like I have to spend on this 5-star experience to placate my friend, and I'm bitter about it because they don't appreciate the fact that I have changed my standard for them. They don't necessarily know that if you don't communicate it. And what is the point of you taking an L for somebody else? Like, society should be everybody slaying together. And I think when it comes to like not being clear on your own standards, it's like, why do I have to take an L so that everybody else can feel good? When in reality, we should all be able to feel good. We need to find a way so that we can all get there together. And I think it's like this weird paradox of like, on the one hand, you're lazy because you don't want to go through the difficulty of like confronting something. And then, but at the same time, like, you're doing more work than is necessary by taking an L up front, if that makes any sense. So keep your standards high, or other people will decide them for you. And the thing is, it's like, the reason why it's okay to change is the reason why it's okay for your standards to change is because maybe you're really adamant about something and you stick to it, and then you're not getting the outcomes that you want. So you have to make a conscious decision to change your mind about it. Like, I always see people talk about this in the context of dating, when it's like a woman who's like so adamant about dating a guy that's a certain height, but like she either can't find a guy that's the height that she wants, or will find guys that are the height that she wants, and then they won't be like compatible in other ways. They're just tall, but they don't like have emotional awareness. They don't earn the amount of money that she would want a partner to earn, whatever. And then one day she decides, okay, you know what? I'm going to give short guys a chance, or I'm going to give shorter guys a chance. And then she meets the love of her life, right? So she kept her standards high, or she kept her standards for herself where they were, as she thought she wanted or needed to at a certain time in her life. And then after gathering enough data and having enough experiences, she decided that she wanted to change them. And that's the same approach that we can take in our own lives. You don't have to have your standards or your expectations remain the same at any given time. Just try to be aware of like where your expectations are at, where your standards are at, get enough information in a certain context, and then see if you want to maintain or if you want to shift and change. I have like 2 other examples, which is like, you know, if, for example, I want to be in loving and supportive friendships, I want to be around people that I feel like I can be my best self around, it doesn't make sense for me to continuously hang out with people that I don't feel like this around, and then become bitter about the state of my social circle once I have an awareness of this. And it's not as simple as like, okay, this person is good or bad for me, because other people are going through their own shit as well and might not be aware of it. So you don't have to write people off completely. But I think, you know, that's another reason why we can allow space in friendships to sort of ebb and flow. But then, you know, if I do spend time with someone who I care about, who maybe isn't the best company or energy, I'm making a conscious decision about it, and I'm going to make the most of that experience instead of getting there, knowing what I know and then being bitter about it. Knowing what I know and like actively putting myself in that situation and then being annoyed about it. Another example is like, if my long-term goal is to achieve a level of status in a certain industry, I am going to have to deal with like shitty people in the process of that. And that is just kind of inevitable in like any industry that you work in. But as long as I see myself making progress despite this bullshit, then I can justify like the means to the end in a way. It's like, okay, this is fucked, but I want to be X and I'm willing to go through ABC to get there. It doesn't matter if the people that I'm dealing with get it or not, because I've set a standard for myself and I'm making progress towards it. And eventually the people that I have to deal with on the way up aren't going to matter to me. Or like their opinion isn't going to matter. You either come with or you stay behind or fuck off, you know? And the most important part about this, like I mentioned before, is like you need to meet your own standards as well. And it doesn't mean that it's like, oh, you want to date a tall guy, so you need to be tall. It's like, are you maintaining like a level of integrity with yourself? Do you say what you mean and then do what you say, or at least take responsibility for what you say and do? Because obviously things change and you're not always going to be able to follow through on everything, but are you able to approach it in a way that has integrity and garners not just respect from other people, but also respect for yourself? Because I'm rereading The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden, and it's like, sometimes people think they're getting away with things that are like shady, but it's always like imprinting on your subconscious on some level. And I feel like if you are untrustworthy to other people, then you are also untrustworthy to yourself, because you can't predict what you will and won't follow through on, because if you're like so flimsy with what you say. So that's something to remember. If you feel like you've been lied to or scammed by somebody else, they are in a scam of their own making. That's why it's like it's coming out in the way that they behave towards others. Definitely something that I've been able to learn about and reflect on in the last few years. So what are your standards, and like what are you willing to do to maintain them? That is like part of your end of the bargain. Like another example in dating is like people saying they just want to marry for money, and they don't want to work. They just want to marry someone rich and be a housewife. Okay, that's all well and good, but do you know about the sacrifices that come with that? There is no easy way out. There is always a price that you need to pay. And if you just want to marry rich, then you're giving up freedom, because whoever has the money has the power. So do you trust the person that you want to marry for money to still have your best interests at heart when you're spending their money, right? And a lot of the time it's like, okay, you don't want to marry for love, you want to marry for money. So are you going to do what it takes to maintain this often requirement that you are conventionally attractive, male gaze friendly? And what will you do if like the person that you marry decides they want to replace you with somebody else? You need to have a backup plan. So it's fine if your standard is you want to marry for money, but what are you willing to give up in that process? How are you going to uphold your end of the bargain? You can't have this high standard and not think that there is a price that you have to pay. You know, it's like, okay, I might have a really high standard for myself when it comes to the work that I do, but the price that I'm paying is the effort and the time that I'm putting in to make sure that the work I do is even good to begin with. I can't just say like I need to be treated with respect from people when I have done nothing to earn it. So that's part 2. Keep your standards high and hold up your end of the bargain, you know. Remind yourself of what it's going to take to maintain that standard for yourself if you ever want someone else to meet you at that standard, right? Okay, and then thirdly, don't reward the bare minimum. This is something I would always do because like, okay, my expectations are low. I have high standards in theory, but when someone is able to just do the bare minimum, I'm like so excited and I overpraise them, and then I'm wasting energy and time. It doesn't mean that you have to go around being a see you next Tuesday, but it just means like be mindful about the company that you're keeping and the amount of praise that you're giving to people who will get complacent if you aren't able to demonstrate like exactly where your standards are. When you're rewarding the bare minimum, it blurs the gap, makes it unclear about what someone is doing and what you really want. And it's not because like you need to extract something from all the people around you, but it's just like you need to keep your expectations low and maintain and preserve your own energy. I think society today treats adults like children, and it's like you have an inner child, but you also need to become like a fully formed person, not like a coddled and helpless human being. And I think if you've dealt with a lot of mistreatment in your life, when you expose yourself knowingly or unknowingly to like negative media and messaging, literally anything that meets or exceeds your low expectations can seem like a gift from God. And it's like, no, that's actually the bare minimum. And that bar hitting you in the face, not a sign from God. So it's easy to then like lose sight of your standards. But what kind of life do you want to live? What kind of person do you want to be? A bare minimum one or a slay one? So I just think that like if someone isn't contributing to your ability to maintain your standards, then it's okay to just kind of like let them go, because it's actually detrimental to both of you to maintain a facade of like compatibility that's not there. And that literally applies to anything, whether it's like work, romance, personal life, etc. And obviously, like I said, like there's nuance and there's context for how you apply this. But, you know, any time that you're hemorrhaging energy into something that is not where you really want to be, that takes away from the energy that you could be contributing to where you want to be. You don't have a limitless amount of energy each day. There is a limit. I definitely used to treat myself as if it was just a free-for-all for like who I could give my time to, who I could give my attention to, what I could invest in emotionally, etc. And it's just like, at the end of the day, I'm just exhausted and I'm not able to then actually work on the things that are important to me. It was always so hard for me to set those boundaries, and it still is, and something that I'm really trying to work on. And I think that it's like being able to differentiate between caring about the concept of someone and being able to assess the contribution that they have in your life, as well as, the way that you can contribute to their life as well. Not everyone can pick up what you're putting down, and that is okay. You don't have to take it personally. Everyone's on their own journey, etc., etc. Keep your expectations low because you don't know like the context in which people are coming from. Most people don't even know the context in which they're coming from, but if you know, then at least that's one of you that can make a decision with a sense of intention and clarity. And it's difficult to be in that position where it's like, it feels like it's your responsibility. But again, you want to have high standards, you want to live a slay life, that is a responsibility that you need to take. And it's not always going to be easy. But if you know what you want and you know what you're working towards, you will eventually get there if you put the effort in. I really believe that. And I think about the times that I was like making excuses for myself, not really putting in the work while expecting, a high standard outcome. And it's like, well, of course you didn't get a high standard outcome, honey. You weren't really doing what it took to get there. And yeah, I also think it just has to do with like human nature, where it's like we actually do need to be pushed in order to grow. And it's easy to get comfortable and become complacent and then lazy if you're being rewarded for the bare minimum. And it's important to set the bar high for yourself and others if you want to move in like an upward spiral direction, not a downward one, because things are always changing, and moving forward in the direction that you want is always going to take effort, because you're basically pushing against gravity and like this concept of entropy where like everything is turning into chaos. So you need to like put in effort to maintain a sense of order in a chaotic world. And I think in a way we're kind of like being conditioned, whether we realize it or not, to be complacent and to be rewarded for very little with this like intermittent reinforcement that comes with being on social media, and the way that that can kind of like change the way that you expect things from real life. But then the flip side of that is like these algorithms also know when to cut supply to engagement or whatever, so that people are then pushed to continuously feed the app. So it's like this sort of toxic cycle. But I do think I recently watched Whiplash, the movie, about the drummer, and it really lit a fire up my ass, because I was like, you know what? Sometimes I really just want to be rewarded for the bare minimum and expect like a high standard outcome. But this movie is showing to me that if you want to do something that is great, at least to your own standards, if you have high standards, then you need to work. And it's just like each person's standard is going to be different. Someone else's standard might be so much higher than mine. I'm like, I don't even understand how you're going to do that. But whether they get there or not, that's up to them. Someone else's standard might be like so much lower than mine. And I'm like, that's all you want to be able to do. That's not my problem. That's their problem. I need to worry about where my standards are at and what I'm willing to do to live the life that I want. And I want you to think about that as well. So keep your expectations low, your standards high, but don't reward the bare minimum. Don't feel like you have to reward the bare minimum. Sometimes, good job. It's worth putting that out there. But other times it's like, don't keep going out of your way to tell someone who's not meeting your standards that they're doing a great job if they're really not, Pick your battles, obviously, but I think sometimes women will overly stroke the ego of a man that they're into. They will get ahead of themselves in terms of thinking that they've somehow met your standard. You haven't truly communicated your standard to them. Over time, they see that your standard is much higher than they're able to reach. They start to freak out, become insecure or resentful. Everything falls apart from there. And you could have saved yourself all that time if both of you were just upfront about where you're really at. But it's not that simple in life, is it? But at least we have an understanding of the experiences that we've had or the experiences that we might have, so we can fast track the learning and the growth process after. Mistakes will be made, but sometimes it's like, okay, well, I already knew that like this is how it goes sometimes, so I can know better for next time. Maybe not necessarily avoid the mistake altogether, but at least the scale of it will be smaller, I hope. Anyway, we really are the only species that can know what's best for us and then choose to do the complete opposite. That's in Nathaniel Branden's 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. But yeah, keep your expectations low and your standards high, and don't feel like you have to reward the bare minimum, because we are here to live a slay life. We want to be hot and have fun. I'm going to have another episode, revised episode, being hot and having fun. Revised part 2 soon. But yeah, thank you for tuning in. I hope that you took something from this episode. Please let me know if you did. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, Twitter, whatever, at Amber Killer. Make sure you drink lots of water. Tell your friends and family that you love them. Love from me to you, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.